It is my distinct honor to introduce to you the Honorable Bill Haslam, his lovely wife Chrissy, as the Governor and First Lady of the great state of Tennessee.
For inviting us to be up here this morning. You know, when I first met Bill in college, his plan was to be a teacher for a few years and then go on to seminary. And I thought that was terrific. He ended up getting convinced by his father to come and work in the family business for a few years. But this plan was still to go to seminary. But as he prayed about it, he really felt called to stay in business. And he loved working in business and growing a family business. So for over 20 years he did that. Politics was never part of the picture. Mayor, governor, none of that. So I guess my first question to you, Bill, is what's a nice guy like you doing in a place like this?
Ever heard of bait and switch? Figure if I told you I was going into politics, I'd never get you. No, I actually never did. Never did think about doing this until before I decided to run for mayor. But I think if I was going to start telling the story of how I ended up here, I would go back to being in high school and one weekend being asked to go to a Young Life, a Christian high school ministry camp. And there, I don't remember his name, I don't really remember a lot of what he said, but the speaker said something to the effect of, the claims of Christ are too bold and too outrageous to ignore. You have to decide either if they're false, in which case you can forget about it and go on about your life just the best way you want, or if they're true, and then that changes everything. And I decided that weekend that those claims were true, and that the best I could, I was going to follow him for the rest of my life. And then as life has a way of happening, reality hit real quick. About 3 weeks after that, I'm in high school in a math class, and the guidance counselor comes to the door and says that I need to come with her and that I need to go home. And I found out after driving home that my mom, who's a very young 42, has laid down to take a nap and didn't wake up and had a heart attack and died. And so for me, the reality of life with this new profession of faith met really quickly. But immediately I was surrounded by others who were encouraging me through my mother's death and in this newfound faith. And that began the journey that I really think ended up with doing the jobs that we're doing now. Well, tell me about you. How'd you end up here? Besides being tricked by me.
Well, my faith story began in 7th grade, and I accepted Christ in a Bible class. But I really never grew. I never probably didn't even totally understand what I'd accepted until later in college. And a similar experience happened to me. I was faced with something that I didn't know how to handle. My younger sister was killed in a car accident, just kind of a freakish, random car accident. And I realized that I was trying to control my own life, and I couldn't do it. And I had to surrender that control to Christ. And I knew Bill at the time. He was part of that because I actually called him to take me to the airport that horrible morning. I knew he had been through something similar and he would understand. That is when I really started to grow, and I think I grew through, I joined a Bible study, and I was in Bible study for the next 30 years. And I sought out good preaching, joined a good church, and sought out really good preaching and grew through that. And I never really had a mentor, but I think books and authors were my mentors. And I think I grew a lot through in that way too. So what helped you grow spiritually?
So I'd say some of the same things. I mean, the fact that we belonged in Knoxville to a church that where we felt like we really were, we had the chance to learn and grow was important. But for me, maybe the distinguishing factor would be that really for 30 years, every Friday morning at 6:15, 4 other guys would pull up into my driveway, and we would pray and meet together and talk. And when I say talk, we literally, I think we only had one rule, and that was that nothing was off limits. And so we talked about everything from what was going out of your checkbook to whether you were loving your wife in the right way, and struggles through children, and even with one of those guys who had a 3 or 4 year struggle with cancer, who ended up succumbing to that. The 5 of us walked through that together as well. And it's hard for me to think what my life would have been like without having those 4 other guys that were asking me hard questions and encouraging me through low times and bringing wisdom to my life that I surely wouldn't have had by myself.
We called them the Friday Five.
Really creative name.
But I loved them too because they held you accountable and they asked the hard questions and cheered for our marriage. And I think they were really important to you, praying you through some difficult transitions in your life. You want to talk about that?
One of them would be running for office, and I was so encouraged to see so many people here who are in public office, because anybody who's ever run for anything, I don't care if it's, governor, school board, county commission, you name it, would tell you it's incredibly difficult. There's a certain vulnerability that comes with putting your name on that ballot that unless you've done that, it's really hard to understand, and I'm seeing some nodding heads out there from a lot of people who have run. But maybe the hardest thing for this is that as a believer, it's this. As believers, we're committed to the idea that the story's not about us, that there's a bigger story going on, and God's called us to play a role in that. But when you run for office, the story is about you. The commercials are about you. You're up at a campaign saying, I'm the guy that can lead the city or lead the state or whatever it is. And if you think about it, there's a verse in Philippians, and try to graft this in with running for office. There's Philippians 2:3 says, do nothing from selfishness or empty conceit, but with humility of mind, let each of you consider others more important than yourself. Okay, now try to do that while you're running for office. It's really hard. And so that was maybe my first struggle. My second one was this. It's interesting, as I ran for office, I had friends from around the country who'd say, well, is it hard as a Christian running for office? I mean, are people giving you a hard time about your faith? And the truth is, in Tennessee, thankfully, it's really not true. As a matter of fact, faith can actually, being a believer can actually help you politically in Tennessee. But that's where the challenge comes. The challenge comes with not using God. The idea is to be used by God and not to use God. And during a campaign in a place like Tennessee, where it's a fairly faith-friendly place, it's really difficult to. It's a challenge not to do that. So these folks helped me through all of those and made certain that my head was in the right place through, the better part of 2 years of running for governor. So tell me about you. What was campaigning like for you?
Well, I wanted you to feel called to run, and I thought if you were called to run, if you felt that call from God, then whatever happened would be all right, and you would never feel called to win. You would just feel called to run, and then leave the winning up to the Lord.
Way easier said than done.
Sometimes I thought what we were supposed to learn was actually going to be in the running, because we learn so much by running. It's humbling. It's not easy to lose every straw poll, to travel every day and hear the same speech over and over, say the same speech over and over. Sometimes you just got tired of hearing yourself talk. I remember you saying. They would be hearing you talk.
Yeah, I think what she's trying to say in a real sensitive way is she got tired of hearing me talk.
But I remember I spent a lot of time in the Psalms during the campaign, and that really helped me.
I think I did. I think anybody can identify with that when you go through a difficult time and you read David's stories of his journeys and identify with the Psalms. So I would agree with that. Well, let me ask you this. So you go from being a campaign to being in a unique role as the First Lady of Tennessee. The kids from New Hope Academy, I got to tell this story on Chrissy. Chrissy went to speak at New Hope Academy one day, and they said, now, are you the First Lady of Tennessee because you're the first lady ever to be in Tennessee?
No, actually, they said, are you the first lady ever to walk on the earth?
Okay, it's even worse. All right. Okay, well, as the first lady ever to no. What's it like? What's it like in this role now?
Well, I think being a Christian in this role is no different from being a Christian in anything I do. I think I'm supposed to model Christ as I go through the day, whether I'm meeting, whether I'm with people that I'm with a lot, or whether I'm with people that I just maybe meet one time. It might mean, going where he leads, depending on him to give me the words to say. I love being able to encourage people. So I love being able to go into schools and meet with students. And I love inviting people to the residence, and especially people maybe who wouldn't have that invitation normally. So we've had military spouses and inner city pastors' wives and things like that. So that's been a lot of fun. And it may sound strange, but I think we have more chances just to be a blessing to people, if that makes sense.
It's a fun story. A year and a half ago, I got to go and visit a lot of our Tennessee National Guards men and women who were in Iraq and Afghanistan. Had my picture made with a guy who was flying a C-130 over there, and he emailed it back to his wife, who that day came to an event that Chrissy did for spouses of folks who were serving in Iraq and Afghanistan. And so the two of them had their picture in Nashville, holding a picture of the two of us in the skies over Afghanistan. So it's an example of what you talked about in terms of being able to be a blessing there.
Okay, it's my turn to ask a question. What does it mean to be a Christian governor in a pluralistic society? Or, when are you going to make Tennessee a Christian state?
You know, we kind of laugh at that question, but it's really kind of the heart of all those of us who are called to be in government is like, well, what's it mean to be a Christian in these roles? Because a lot of people have very different ideas of how that should be acted out. You know, it's interesting to me as I'm a history major and a history lover, and if you look at where the church has ever gotten totally tied in with the state, where the church has become part of the state, it hasn't worked out so well for the church. If you look around the world today, Africa, Asia, Europe, the place where the church, this is the church at large, is probably the weakest is Europe. And it's where it really got tied in with the state. And I think we end up kind of co-opting our values when we become part of the state. Now, that doesn't mean we're not called to be actively involved, but the idea that we'd have a Christian state, I think, hasn't proved out well. And it's interesting to me, Christ, if you look at it, he really lived side by side with Herod, who was the most powerful man in that part of the world. And Jesus pretty much ignored him. If you look, you know, they lived side by side, and Jesus, you know, did all that so much that I think it kind of bugged Herod that he was just, you know, Jesus never came to see him. And even at the end, you know, he says, hey, the state's saying, hey, we have power over you. You know, you need to start, you know, we can maybe pull you out of this mess that you're in here. And Jesus says, no, you don't. And pretty much ignores them. Now, obviously, I don't think that means that we're not supposed to be involved in government. We are, we're called. But one of the experiences I have from being in government is this, and I'm stealing this line from someone else. Government does a lot better job of filling potholes than we do of filling hearts. And there's a certain role for us to by that, I don't mean we shouldn't bring our faith to, I mean, it's who we are. And I wouldn't be in this job if I wasn't a believer. I just would have chosen a different path. So we bring that, but the idea that we're going to have a Christian state, I just don't see anywhere in the Bible. I guess the final thing I'd point out there is this. The verse where in the Bible it talks about, you know, we hold this treasure of Christ living in us in jars of clay. And all of us have such a distinct awareness of that, you know, we are jars of clay. We don't understand why Christ would give this treasure to live in us and we wouldn't make them into these golden vessels that we know we're not. But understanding the jars of clay that we are and that we're called into these roles, I think gives a whole different perspective in this sense of understanding that I'm a jar of clay means understanding that I'm not always right. And I think that helps us maybe to lead with a different kind of wisdom.
So what inspires you on a difficult day?
There are difficult days. I think it's this. It's a real sense of God's faithfulness. One of the things that I started doing several years ago was keeping a journal. And I do that for two reasons. For those of you who are in the media, that's not subject to the Freedom of Information Act. I hope. If it is, I'm toast. But I do that for two reasons. One is to getting a little forgetful. I kind of forget stuff. I'm like, all that. But the second is to remind myself how faithful God is. I get, like all of us, there are things you go through that you're like,
this mountain is huge. I have no idea how we're going to get around this. And it's a major issue you're struggling with and working with. And then all of a sudden you go back and read about that 3 months later. And it doesn't always work out maybe the way you intended it to, but I can always see God's faithfulness and his handprints all over that. I can see that in our lives. Losing my mother, losing your sister, losing one of my best friends, none of that worked out the way that I thought it would, but I still see God's faithfulness throughout that. And for me, the awareness of God's faithfulness is, regardless of what we're going through, is kind of the constant assurance. So what about you? What inspires you through a hard day?
Well, one of my favorite verses is at the end of Matthew. And it's when Jesus' last words. I think last words are important. I think people think about their last words. And I remember my father's last words before he died. So most people think, a lot of people think Jesus' last words were, go and make disciples of all men. But in Matthew, it says another verse at the very end. He says, after he says, go and make disciples, he says, and lo, I'm with you always. And I think about that, and I think, well, he could have said, don't forget to pray, don't go sin, be good. He could have said a lot of different things, but he said, he knew what we needed to hear. He said, I'm with you. And he said, he knew we didn't want to be alone, or we needed him. And so I think that inspires me a lot on tough days. He's with us, and we are not alone. He's Emmanuel. So.
Last words are important, and so why don't we let those be the last words. Thank you all very much for letting us be here today.